Here's our next one. If passed, abortion would be legal all the way through a pregnancy. People could have an abortion at any time for any reason. True or false?
That too is false, probably. It would be, this amendment would simply say that uh, people have a right to have reproductive care, and then the legislature would have the ability to limit that.
Mhm.
Now, they cannot limit it before viability, and viability in this law is dealt with by saying that the doctor is to determine whether the fetus is viable or not. So you can't have a clear-cut cutoff at any particular week. There has to be some discussion with the doctor. Um, in Ohio right now, we have a 22-week cutoff. That is pretty close to viability. I think viability is often said to be 23, 24 weeks nowadays. As technology changes, that might shift. Um, so the law that we have now would have to be tweaked, I think, to allow
Mhm.
the doctor to say, no, not yet, the fetus isn't viable, but it would be around 23, 24 weeks if the legislature wants to continue limiting it that way.
Mhm. And
Um,
so right now we do have a legal limit of 22 weeks. So the legislature would have to actively repeal that and then not replace it with any limitations. Is that correct? Is that what would have to happen?
if we don't want limitations in Ohio, the legislature would have to repeal the 22-week law. If this amendment passes, I think the existing law that has a very strict 22-week cutoff
Mhm.
would have to be tweaked to allow a doctor to say, no, the fetus isn't viable yet, but it wouldn't be a radical change because 22 weeks is close to viability.
And would that tweak come from a legislator introducing that, or how would that tweak come to happen in Ohio?
Ideally, the legislature would fix it on their own. It's possible it will require litigation and a court would tell them to fix it. So there are different pathways.
Okay. And we know that in the United States in the last 50 years that Roe versus Wade was a constitutionally protected law. That very few pregnancies were ended after 21 weeks. I think the statistics are something like less than 1% after 21 weeks. Is there any reason to think that if this amendment were put into place, that that would be different?
Absolutely not. Most people, if they choose to have an abortion, will do it as quickly as possible. I think the vast majority are done within the first trimester, within the first 12 to 13 weeks, um, because it's less expensive, less complicated, less painful, fewer days off of work.
Mhm.
There is no reason to wait. Now, in some cases, you develop severe medical problems later on. So some abortions do happen later. And again, if there were um, a severe medical problem after viability, that would still be allowed. But nobody has an incentive to wait, to drag it out, to do an abortion as late as possible. And that's not going to change.
And so, I mean, why would someone have an abortion at 22 weeks? I mean, I think you kind of just said it, but can you say that again? If the rates of pregnancy termination after 21 weeks are in that less than 1%, it sounds like what you're saying is that people who are getting a pregnancy termination at that point are people who probably wanted to be pregnant, and they're finding out something about the health of the fetus or the health of themselves, how the pregnancy would impact them, and that's what's driving the decision to have a termination at that point. Is that correct?
I think that's the vast majority of the cases. I mean, there may be cases where women didn't know they were pregnant, were sure they were pregnant, were really struggling with the decision, and so it gets delayed. But that is a small minority of cases, because the longer you wait, the more difficult the procedure is.
Okay. The amendment also talks about case by case, and that's been confusing for folks about what that would mean when determining when an abortion could happen after the viability period. Why would that be something that they would include in the amendment to say case by case?
Right. So, first of all, viability is shifting. As we get better technology, babies can survive if they're born earlier. So it actually allows for a shifting of the deadline, so maybe in some years it will be 21 weeks. So you don't want to have a 22-week cutoff necessarily.
Mhm.
But also, this just allows a woman to interact with her doctor. The doctor can determine if the fetus is viable, if there are some medical problems with the fetus, it might be viable later on, and you might still want to have an abortion because this is going to be a child who doesn't survive, or who is going to eventually die in the womb, and so on. And so it just allows doctors to be the decision makers. It allows for some flexibility. It allows for shifting as technology improves. It's just a better approach than some kind of clear cut, random number of weeks.
And the amendment names the treating physician, the patient's treating physician, as the kind of decider. Is that who would typically perform the abortion, or is that a different doctor?
It may be either way. So it may be that you go to your primary care physician and the physician says, yes, you are pregnant, and if you don't want to keep the baby, you have to go somewhere that provides abortion. We don't provide it here.
Mhm.
It could be if you're going to the emergency room because there is a medical crisis. It could be whoever's treating you in the emergency room. Some people are economically disadvantaged, do not have primary care physicians, so they will go to Planned Parenthood, and Planned Parenthood will do both, help them with the decision making and then perform the abortion. So there are a wide range of scenarios.